At first glance, the Pacific Northwest coastline is breathtaking. Jagged cliffs, dense forests, and endless surf. But there's one spot, right where the Columbia River meets the Pacific Ocean, that sailors have feared for generations. This is no ordinary river mouth. Here, tides clash with currents, sandbars shift without warning, and storms roll in with almost no time to react. The incidences here speak for themselves. The SS Valencia, shattered on the rocks with more than 100 lives lost. The Peter Iredale, left rusting on the beach for over a century. And then of course we have the mysterious SS Pacific, which was swallowed by the sea and only recently found, resting deep beneath the surface. Its passengers and gold cargo long gone. And here's the thing, there are thousands of other wrecks in the same vicinity. That's why they call it the Graveyard of the Pacific. So why would anyone keep trying to cross it, and how is this waterway navigated in the modern day? Stay tuned to find out as we uncover the story of the Graveyard of the Pacific. I'm your host Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. This episode is brought to you by Delete Me. Try this. Google yourself. You notice how much of your personal information is already out there? Well, you might be shocked at just how easily anyone can find out everything about you in seconds. That's right, your personal data, your name, address, phone number, and more. It's all for sale. And what's the worst part? This is a billion-dollar industry. In fact, it was recently discovered that data broker databases were even selling information on US military personnel. So if even those with high levels of security measures aren't safe, what does that mean for the rest of us? That's where Delete Me comes in. I use it personally and recommend it because it works. It removes your information from hundreds of databases where it shouldn't be. And it's not just a one-time fix. Delete Me continuously monitors to ensure your data doesn't resurface. When you sign up, Delete Me scans data broker sites and gives you a detailed report on where your information is exposed. They then remove it and track it to ensure that it stays gone. I tried it myself, and it shocked me to see how many sites had my personal information without my knowledge. In just days, all of that unauthorized data was wiped from multiple databases. So don't let your personal information keep getting sold without your consent. Take control today. Use my code SOCASH or click the link in the description for 20% off. Go to joindeleteme.com/SOCASH, activate your plan, and reclaim your privacy. Don't wait until someone else misuses your data. Protect yourself now. And remember, online privacy isn't a luxury. It's a necessity. Every day you go without protecting your information is another day that anyone can access it. Thanks to Delete Me for sponsoring this video and helping more people take back control of their data. Let's start off with a little context. To understand how this place became a graveyard, per se, you have to look at who tried to cross it first. Long before Europeans arrived, Indigenous people had lived along this coastline for generations, and they didn't rely on instruments to know the water was dangerous. Rather, oral traditions passed down the warnings. Certain passages were avoided, and some waters were seen as having a will of their own. Among the natives, it was understood that the sea was alive and not always friendly. Stories told of waves that shifted without wind, or fog that swallowed canoes in seconds. These weren't seen as superstitions. They were weather systems passed down in spoken form, knowledge of where not to go and when not to go there. And the idea that some routes were, quote, cursed was often based on hard-won experience, drownings, lost fishers, or returning canoes found empty. With that in mind, when European sailors first arrived, they didn't recognize those boundaries and had to learn some of the same lessons the hard way. European explorers began arriving in the late 1700s, though something major happened in 1792. This is when American captain Robert Gray crossed into the Columbia River aboard the Columbia Redivus. And it was that success which opened the door to trade and settlement, but also more shipwrecks. By the mid-1800s, vessels regularly disappeared near the river's mouth. Mariners realized this wasn't just a tricky harbor, it was a perfect storm. The Columbia's massive current smashed into Pacific tides, colliding with winds and ocean swells. Then, beyond that, the river sediment formed the Columbia Bar, an unpredictable sandbar that rises just below the surface, breaking waves out of nowhere. By the 1880s, sailors were calling it the Graveyard of the Pacific. It It wasn't just a nickname, it was a reputation earned, wreck by wreck. The first wreck of note was the SS Pacific, a wooden-hulled steamship built in New York in the 1850s, then disassembled, shipped around Cape Horn, and reassembled in San Francisco. By 1875, it was aging but still active, though its end was near. On November the 4th, it departed Victoria with over 275 people on board, many returning from the gold rush. It was reportedly overloaded and riding low. And that very night, off Cape Flattery, the Pacific collided with the Orpheus, a sailing ship. The old steamer sank quickly. Lifeboats capsized in the cold, rough water, and only 2 people survived. This was such a tragic event because the wreck site was just outside the Columbia's reach, and with the fast-changing seas, poor visibility, and no second chances, rescue was basically impossible. The ship wasn't found until 2022, and it was resting deep on the ocean floor. For nearly 150 years, it was just one more name lost to that graveyard. And after a few decades, yet another steamer would go down, but this time within plain sight of land. In January of 1906, the SS Valencia left San Francisco for Victoria with over 170 people aboard. Now, this vessel wasn't built for rough open seas, and it met a winter storm head-on. Blinded by fog and battered by wind, the ship drifted off course. Then, somewhere around midnight, it struck the rocks on Vancouver Island. The shore was steep, rescue attempts failed, and once again, the lifeboats capsized. Some passengers tried to swim but didn't survive the strong currents. Locals on shore could see the wreck, but they couldn't reach it. One telegraph operator stationed at the nearby lighthouse wrote that he could see women clinging onto the railings of the ship as it pitched in the waves. Apparently, he could even make out their faces through a spyglass, but could do nothing. Other witnesses described lifeboats flipping as soon as they hit the water, some with passengers still inside. A few survivors later recalled hearing people singing hymns just before the final section of the hull was torn apart by the surf. Even by maritime standards, the helplessness felt that day was profound. The land was in shouting distance, but the water wouldn't let anyone pass. After 36 hours, the ship broke apart and only 37 people survived. The Valencia disaster shocked the public. It spurred investigations and pushed governments to improve coastal safety infrastructure. But for many, it also confirmed what they long suspected. This coastline wasn't just dangerous, it was deadly. Just weeks after the Valencia disaster, the Peter Iredale was headed for Portland. As it approached the Columbia, a gale blew in. The captain dropped his anchor, but strong currents drove the ship onto a sandbar. Fortunately, the crew survived as they were rescued by life-saving services, but the ship itself couldn't be salvaged. And that's what makes the Peter Iredale so unusual. We can still see it. I have to emphasize here that most wrecks in the graveyard of the Pacific don't just sit out in the open, they vanish. And then the Columbia Bar basically eats them. You see, between the shifting sands and steep underwater drop-offs, many vessels slide into canyons or get covered by layers of sediment within days. The force of the river's outflow can scatter wreckage for miles before anyone even knows that the ship is missing. And in that context, marine historians estimate that hundreds of wrecks are still unfound. Sonar scans sometimes pick up unknown hulls, and considering the lack of record for these vessels, it's interesting to consider what cargo they might still contain. But because the region is so violent, excavation is almost impossible. From 1906 onwards, wrecks kept happening. For example, there was the case of the J.A. Chancellor, an early oil tanker which broke apart in 1919, and dozens more vanished over the following decades. By World War II, maritime traffic surged in the area, and so did the risks. Some wrecks were due to weather, others went down under wartime conditions. Hence, eventually, the region began to adapt. Lighthouses were built in places like Tillamook Rock and Cape Disappointment. Beyond that, life-saving stations expanded, and in many ways, the U.S. Coast Guard took over the area. Bar pilots, who are experts in reading the Columbia Bar's ever-changing conditions, became mandatory for every ship entering or leaving the river. And we should note here that few maritime roles are more demanding or dangerous than that of a Columbia River bar pilot. These aren't ordinary navigators. Most have decades of experience and thousands of crossings under their belt, which are basics for even being considered for this job. When a vessel approaches the bar, the pilot doesn't just board calmly at the dock, rather, they leap from a smaller boat onto a moving cargo ship, often in rough seas, with nothing but timing and footwork keeping them from falling between the hulls. Once aboard, they assume control of navigation. These mariners know every shifting channel, every seasonal sandbar, and how to read the water at a glance. This is a serious responsibility. Remember, just one wrong judgment in these conditions is all it takes to sink a ship within minutes. In other words, despite modern technology, the shipping companies still rely on these specialists to help thread the needle. Though they don't always like their decisions, as in some cases, pilots have ordered ships to turn back, which massively hurts the company's efficiency, but these type of conservative decisions are exactly what can save lives when conditions are too unstable for any machine or map to safely predict. Meaning, in a place where maps fail, these mariners are the marginal line between life and loss. Still, even with all these measures, wrecks continued. The new Carissa in 1999, the Pacific Skipper in 2001, fishing boats, tugs, small crafts, and so on. Radar and GPS have helped, but the dangers never really lift, though it would seem that, at best, they've become better managed. In the modern day, the graveyard didn't disappear. It just seems that we've better learned how to work around it. The U.S. Coast Guard plays a central role. Sector Columbia River oversees a vast region, where patrols are frequent and search and rescue missions are common. Their 47-foot motor lifeboats are built for rough seas, so are their Centennial-class cutters. They operate year-round in the most brutal conditions of the West Coast. Crews train at the National Motor Lifeboat School at Cape Disappointment. It's one of the toughest environments in the country, and yet they're not dissuaded. These guys risk their lives every time they respond. We should also add that beyond the obvious danger, the place has become something of a cultural symbol. The Peter Iredale now draws tourists to the beach, and the Columbia River Maritime Museum keeps the memory of past wrecks alive, not to mention the ongoing reference in pop culture, art, and music. And it's in just that concept that an urban lore has emerged in the region, recalling tales of tragedy and the rage of nature. We'll leave it there for today, but I thank you all for watching, and until next time, I'm Ryan Sokash, signing off.